Bootstrap includes basically three different layouts for forms. There is a class equal form, which you put into the form tag, and that basically creates a stacked form. There's form inline, which you also put into the form tag, and that creates an inline form. So basically, it organizes your labels in your controls uh, towards the right, and then it wraps down to the next line. And then you can also use the Bootstrap grid layout with rows and columns. So you still would have class set to form, okay, but your entire form and any titles that you wanted included would be contained inside the row class. And then you'd be including the columns to lay out your title and your form within that row class. So in this example, the title itself is taking up 12 columns, so that's an entire row. Then the form is set to take up about half of the space, and the graphic is set up to take only 4 columns, which leaves 2 columns of white space on the right-hand side. Okay, so there's several different options for laying out your form. So when you have a form, you do need to have class equal either form or form inline in the form tag itself. Then for your labels and your controls, you will have a div around them, around each set that has form group, and that is basically for optimum spacing. Then your controls will have a class set to form control, and your labels will have a class set to form label. And that applies to the majority of the form elements. So input, text area, and select. Checkbox and radio use a little different classes. Okay, so input, select, text area, use the form group, form control, and form label. Checkboxes and radio buttons are a little different. So instead of using the form group for the container, you either use form check or form check inline. And this is for both checkboxes and radio. Then your labels are going to use form check label, and the input element is going to use class equal form check input. So how this looks. So for the majority of your input elements, it's just going to be form group, and that is a container. And then inside the container, you would then have your label with the class set to form label, and your actual element itself with a class set to form control. And you can see that both of these inputs, both of these little groups of labels and input elements are set up the same way. For a select, it's going to be similar. You're going to have a container of form group. Inside the form group, you will have a label, and then you will have your form control. Text area is the same. So then we get into checkbox, and that's where it is a little different, because instead of having that outer container for that label and input being form group, it's going to be form check. And then for the label, it's form check label. And for your input, it's form check input. And the radio is going to be pretty much the same thing. So the div that is the container for the label and your input is going to be form check. And then the class that you add to the label is form check label. And then the class that you add to the input is form check input. And then for inline, because we do have the inline option for the radio buttons and the check boxes, for the first line of code where we have form check, if you wanted inline, you would say form check inline. As far as your headings go, Bootstrap does recognize headings 1 through 6, and it also recognizes display headings. And so to see what those look like, there's display 1 through 4, so you can kind of see what those look like. And how do those differ? So this is a heading 1, and this is display 1. So you can see the font is obviously a little different, and so is the size. Bootstrap uses something called contextual color classes, and they are designed to provide meaning through color. The same color classes are used for text, links, and backgrounds. The difference is for a background color, you prefix the contextual text name with BG dash. And for text, you put text in front of it. So it's text dash. So text and link classes in this little table are the same. And then you have the background class. And then I have an example of how that looks for text. So you can kind of get an idea of what that contextual color looks like. And the reason that errors in forms are displayed in red is because that is supposed to be a danger or pay attention color. Okay, so you can kind of see how these are typically used. The Jumbotron, we have taken a look at this already. It displays as a large gray box with rounded corners and enlarged text, and it is designed to bring attention to content. You can put the Jumbotron class in any div tag, and you can also include it in your HTML elements. In Bootstrap, buttons use a button class, and there are some variations depending on what color you want to use. The colors here are contextual. So if you just use button or button default, you are going to get white. If you use button dash primary, you'll get this blue primary color with white text. Success is going to give you the green. Info is a lighter blue. Then we have warning, danger, and a link. So if you create buttons, and MVC does create buttons for you, and they will be using that default button style. So you certainly can change it. You can change it to any of the other button styles if you don't like the color. When we generate views, the create, edit, and delete views all have buttons that you can adjust. So up until now, when we have wanted our images to be responsive, we have basically been making the width 100%. There is a class that you can use, image-fluid, that will make your image responsive. And then there are also classes that will change the way the image looks. So class equal rounded adds a little rounded corner to your image. Rounded circle changes it to an actual circle. Now, in order for you to see the edge of the images, I did apply a little shadow to the image, and I just used normal CSS for that. That is not part of the Bootstrap styling. Okay, so the Bootstrap styling is going to give you the rounded ends, which for this graphic are hard to see if I don't outline it with a box shadow. The thumbnail, image-thumbnail, actually puts a little white border around the image. What's a little strange is it does not affect the size. It just puts the border on it. Now, that is kind of counterintuitive because you would think that it would affect the size. So to get this to look like a thumbnail, I actually had to style it using a width of 100 pixels. Thumbnails are typically anywhere from 100 to 200 pixels. You can change the alignment using a class, and this is very similar to the CSS that we would use for aligning a graphic. So float left puts the image on the left, and the text flows around it on the right. One thing that I did do so that the text didn't come right up on the edge of the image is I did style it with a right margin. And then we have float right, where the image goes on the right and the text kind of flows around it on the left. And you'll notice on this one, I put a left margin. And then if you want to center align a graphic, there is a class or a couple classes that you can use that will do that. You need to use MX Auto and dBlock. MX Auto makes the margins automatic, and dBlock applies a display block to the image. And so here is the classes that were added to this graphic. So it is a rounded circle. I have MX. Now, if you want to make the image itself responsive, instead of styling it with the width of 100%, you can add a class of image fluid. Bootstrap also includes margins and padding. And so once you kind of learn the conventions for this, it is pretty easy to use. So the margin class starts with an M, followed by the location. MT is top, MR is right, ML is left, MB is bottom. Values can be 0 through 5 for the size. So MT-2 is margin top set to 2. ML-2.5 is a left margin set to 2.5. And the sizes correspond to root element unit values, which means that if you use a size of 1, that is the current size. 0.75 is 25% less. 2 is double the size. 1.5 is 1.5 times the size. Padding works the same way. So PT, PR, PB, and PL is padding for the top, right, bottom, and left. Values can be 0 through 5. So PT-3 is going to create a padding at the top that is about 3 times the size of the normal original padding. And then for both padding and margins, if you just say M dash and whatever size you want, or P dash and whatever size you want, it's going to affect all the sides.